Good morning, and thank you all so much for coming here. I'm really sorry we don't have chairs for everyone, but please try and make yourselves as comfortable as possible. You're more than welcome to sit on the floor or back on the stairs there as well if you need to sit down. Henk Pander was born and raised in Haarlem in the Netherlands. He studied at the Rijksacademy in Amsterdam and exhibited his work throughout the Netherlands in the early 1960s before moving to Portland in 1965. He has an extremely extensive and impressive exhibition history showing his work throughout the Northwest, nationally and internationally, including a number of exhibitions at the Portland Art Museum, as well as at the Halliford Museum of Art, the Tacoma Art Museum, the Frye Museum, the Seattle Art Museum, the Boise Art Museum, and a number of museums in the Netherlands, including a 2008 exhibition at the Rijksmuseum. And we are very happy to announce that his work will also be on display at the Rijksmuseum, the newly renovated Rijksmuseum, as they celebrate their grand reopening this coming April. Very exciting. And Henk has, his work has been collected very well by private, corporate, and public collections, and is included in the collections of the City of Amsterdam, the City of Portland, the Dutch government, NASA, the Halliford Museum, the Frye Museum, Boise Art Museum, of course the Portland Art Museum, and the Rijksmuseum. He's also been received a number of awards throughout his career, most recently a Visual Arts Fellowship and an Artist Residency, both through the Regional Arts and Culture Council, and the Oregon Governor's Arts Award. And he's also been awarded many commission projects throughout his career, creating major works for the Portland Fire Department, the Port of Portland, Portland Center for the Performing Arts, to name just a few. He has been exhibiting his work with our gallery since 2003. And I am thrilled to have his work here this month and have him here to speak with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Oh my goodness, look at all these people. Well, gee, I had to sort of collect my thoughts here a little bit. This body of work here is actually part of even a larger body of work, consisting of like drawings, a number more paintings and watercolors of studies. This whole group of work has done within the last 2 years, about 2 years, so it's all really quite recent. The body work as a whole consists of like a number of groups of people, of paintings of different themes. And there's a theme of still life, which is represented in the room upstairs there. There is one painting consisting of a different group of works. So this painting is representative. There's a large Oregon landscape also representing a kind of a somewhat separate group of work, and then there is these large sort of historic astronomy related paintings. So there's different groupings representing the show. However, thematically and sort of conceptually, they are all really very similar. They have a certain kind of point of view about it, which is consistent. There's two large paintings here, and I think this painting is sort of the first, and then that painting on the other one, large painting, is sort of response to it. And there's sort of two like bookends in the group of work. This painting, which seems to get a lot of attention, is based on, occasionally I make a lot of watercolors in the landscape. Just right on location. I paint in the deserts of the United States, but also at times I go to the Netherlands and take like a big roll of paper with me, and I have some drawing boards with my sister, and paint out in the Dutch landscape as well, to sort of connect me with sort of the larger world, so I'm not only here in America, but I also sort of retain this sort of cultural connection with Europe and my my background and where I came from. I was staying with my sister in the north of Holland, in a province called Friesland, and there was a little town called Harlingen, and in the harbor of Harlingen there was a great contemporary harbor with great ships in it and new buildings, and I thought it'd be sort of cool to make some watercolors out there. So we just drove around there with all my watercolor stuff in my sister's car, and all of a sudden my eyes sort of looked across this canal, and across this canal was this ship, and it really didn't make any sense in terms of what kind of boat that was. It was quite large, it was somewhat low slung, and it had this sort of look about it, and it looked like a 17th century yacht. I just couldn't figure out what it was, but it was unusual, and it was historic, and it was old, and it was sort of totally out of context in this sort of contemporary setting of this modern Dutch high-tech harbor. And it had a sort of echo of like a long time ago, like the world was in a sense sort of lost. And since it was so unusual, I couldn't figure out what it was, what it represented, and where it came from, and I thought, oh, I'll make a watercolor of it. And it just sort of, so I made this big watercolor. But these harbors out there, it was just like a big, huge brick and containers and all that. And I was with my drawing boards and all my stuff around there. I was really quite exposed, so within 5 minutes, somebody would come on a bicycle and said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I'm standing right in front of you. And you're painting the Prince Willem. So they had a name. And then some sailors came by and said, "Oh, this is the Prince Willem, we're going to restore it." And all that. Well, the story was about the ship that in the beginning, the early 17th century, like around 1606 or so, one of the greatest Dutch ship of the East Indies Company had sailed to Japan, and the Japanese had a trading island within the Netherlands where the Japanese allowed foreigners there, and they allowed the Dutch to trade like Western goods with the Japanese, and they would then bring like ceramics and pottery back to the Netherlands, and the birth of like, Delft Blue and Dutch ceramics sort of has its history, this connection with Japan, the 16th century. So this great ship went there, and they had a sail across the Cape of Africa, and in the Strait of Madagascar, in a great storm, the ship sank to the bottom of the ocean and disappeared. Years later, in the just relatively recent, the Japanese decided to build a museum to commemorate their history with the Dutch. And the Dutch government built a complete exact replica of the Prince Willem and hauled it to Japan, and there was all this rigging and cannon and sculptures, this whole beautiful 17th century ship, this massive ship, lying in the harbor in Japan, and people visited the little Dutch town and so on and so forth. And the company which had this museum there went belly up, it went bankrupt, and the Dutch took the Prince Willem, or the replica of it, hauled it back to the Netherlands, and parked it in the Dutch sort of shipping harbor of Den Helder, where all the like the San Diego of the Netherlands. And it was there, and it was a party ship, or a visitor ship, a colorful ship. Deep in the interior of the ship was a bar. And one night, just in the holds of the ship, and one night, a short developed in this bar, and a fire developed in it. And it developed so much smoke into the cream-soaking wood that the fire department couldn't put the fire out, and they just let it burn. It was a huge conflagration. This historic replica just went up in flames. There's great bits on Google. You can Google Prince Willem, you see the burning of the ship, the Dutch fire department, all that. And so they let it burn out, and they hauled the hulk of the ship, the Harley later on, to to be restored. So there it wasn't, that's how I found it. And so all of a sudden this sort of mysterious thing lying there had all these incredible layers of like history to it, there's echoes of like a long time ago, the time of Rembrandt and the old Dutch painters, and my own sort of personal history, the kind of sense of loss, the contemporary sort of trying to sort of echo and remember these things, the disturbance of contemporary life and the fires and the dangers that includes the ironies of all that combined in this one image of this ship, this linkage of the centuries in a sense. And that spoke to me, and I thought that would just make an incredible painting. And so when I came back to Portland, I just built this big bunch of canvases. And did this painting of the ship and sort of remembered the ocean and the sea and the distant travels, and also at the same time the fire of it and the decline of it and a really deep, profound sense of loss. The loss itself, the sense of like time passing and in my own life, sort of the moving to the United States, losing basically, in some ways, my family. And once I moved here, I lost track of my brothers and sisters. All my uncles and aunts died. My whole culture sort of faded away in order to replace with a new culture. Personal losses in my life, the whole sense of like things so rapidly changing and sort of trying to hold on to things, that sort of pervasive sense of like loss actually is kind of a thread which really appears in a lot of my work. There's other elements in my work I've always also been interested in, especially in the United States. It's like it's extremely advanced technologies, and also I thought that the flip side of this military technology was its astronomical capabilities. The fact that you could take like a spy telescope and flip it around and it becomes a Hubble Space Telescope and you look far in the reaches of space. In the 70s, the opening up of the solar system and becoming suddenly a big part of a much larger sort of sense about who we are in relation to the larger space around and all this kind of worlds around us, the connection between astronomy and seeing and looking at nature, the language of astronomy about color and seeing and space, which is basically also the language of painting. There's to look at nature and see the landscape beyond the sky, that there's other landscapes. All that I thought was endlessly fascinating, and it gave a kind of a positive sort of forward-looking element to which is essentially a very destructive part of our lives as well. It's just technologies. And so for a period of time, especially in the 70s and 80s, I was deeply involved in science. I worked with NASA. I documented the Galileo program for the testing, the construction, and the launch of Galileo, which went to Jupiter. I visited large telescopes and stuff, and I had just a powerful theme I was involved in for a period of time, and I sort of picked up that thread again and sort of started making me think that I'd like to connect that sort of sense of historic time I sort of feel connected with the world of old 17th century painting and the tradition of Dutch painting and figuration and looking at a humanist kind of painting, and at the same time the sort of the reality of living in this extremely somewhat violent but also technically advanced culture, as sort of juxtaposing these kind of notions and sort of finding myself sort of in the middle of that. And so that's how I ended up making this large telescope painting, and I thought, how am I going to connect these two paintings? They seem so different thematically. And so I had sort of one thought about that I've painted in the past, like painters like the history of science. And so there were these two early astronomers, Tycho and Kepler. Kepler and Tycho. Kepler was a theorist, and Tycho was basically the first observational astronomer even before the invention of the telescope. They preceded Galileo, or at the time of Galileo, or a little bit earlier. Kepler had kind of a notion about, they tried to figure out the orbits of the planets, and they assumed that they were, since God had made the universe perfectly, Earth would be in the middle, everything, or the sun and everything went around it, because this is where the heart of God's creation was. That turned, to be untrue, because it was discovered that the sun actually was the center of our solar system. And so they thought, well, they have to be circular, but then the measurements didn't really seem to sort of fit that. And so Tycho was a Danish prince, did this extremely precise measurements, although he was a very difficult, somewhat corrupt individual. He was also a very, very precise measurements he made of the motions of the planets, and especially Mars. Well, Kepler tried to figure out how the theory of that, the distances between these things, and the laws between the distances and the shapes of these planets. The information from Tycho came in the hands of Kepler, and together, in a sense, they described the orbits of Mars, and by extension the orbits of the planet, that these were elliptical rather than egg-shaped, or had little conversions in them. And so, essentially, these astronomers who came exactly out of the same period as the ship, same time, they described something which goes around us in a deep space, and right now we are traveling around it with a car-sized probe, a robot driving around and making all these incredible discoveries on Mars. So it sort of connects the connection between this painting and that painting, the history of astronomy, and a sense of history of painting links it also to contemporary experience as the history of the ship also. So there's this sort of, these two paintings sort of connect these and make that sort of as a kind of conceptual whole. Another thing which I found really interesting about, who we are and what we do is like that we are doing all this as human beings. Human beings don't really change. There is not really some sort of great change in people from like 50,000 years ago to probably in the future years. Their brains are formed in such a way that they're not going to alter very much. They're human beings, and they're flawed humans. Kepler was a flawed person. He was very sort of paranoid and hypochondriac. His mother was haunted as a witch. His whole family was like completely, totally screwed up. Tycho was in a sword fight and had his nose cut off in a sword fight and had a silver nose. He died of the burst with drinking too much. He was just like extremely human characters who just have still at the same time the wit to come up with these incredibly elegant notions about where we are in relation to space, and that humanity, that they're human, that who we are as a civilization, as a culture, as human beings, something which I find really moving and touching. So the humanist element of these figures I try to paint in there by actually asking individual people whom I know, who somehow corresponded in my mind a little bit to these characters. I painted in there from life, and I actually borrowed from the Portland Opera Company period costumes and actually dressed them in period, but also gave it a kind of sense of make-believe, like dressed up by leaving their regular shoes and you see it sort of hints from, it's a sort of like, it's not reality, but it's a painted reality, and it has a slight sort of ironic edge and humor, which makes it also possible to do these pieces. So that's sort of the connection between these works. There's a still life in the other room there, which is part of a larger group of work, and maybe next year there will be a show. But my wife Dolores passed away, close to 2 years now. And so I have done a body of work sort of commemorating her, and I'm doing still life of like things which are meaningful to her and meaningful to my history with her which is also something I use quite a bit in still lifes, sort of constructing still lifes, that they are also kind of monuments or memorials. So a sense of remembrance and memorial echoes through a lot of these paintings. The painting behind me here is comes out of a group of work which I had a commission for the Los Angeles County Fire Department, and spent like several weeks with the fire department there doing ride-alongs, and I was confronted with a great deal of medical emergencies, essentially. Not fires, but mostly what firemen do is just medical emergencies, here also here in Portland. So there's always a sort of interaction between people in their hardest hour, in their time of real great need, where people, so although it's the government sort of reaches out to them and tries to sort of help whatever there is to be helped. So there's always this sort of moment of like people touching other people in this sort of, oftentimes right in the streets or in like dangerous sitting in car accidents and stuff. In this moment of despair, to sort of helping each other, that notion of trying people to sort of help each other, I think is meaningful. I mean, that's probably one of the more meaningful things we have, is this sort of help each other out in time of need. It just had a whole story of this ship this week, which got lost at sea, and people drifted around, and they were in terrible circumstances, and the beautiful thing about the ship just sort of coming to the shore was how close people had become in this moment of really great difficulty, being lost at sea with all the horrors that entailed and stuff, and it brought people together and created friendships forever. So and they were out without television, and they were without cell phone distance, and they had to talk to each other, and that really became sort of more the most important experience out of that whole scene in that cruise ship. I have a lot of documentation about these kind of interactions, and what I thought is like, say, rather than having like, uniform characters, I thought, what if I stripped all those uniforms off there and just retain the interaction of people reaching out for one another and trying to help each other, except the setting has just really changed in some more fantastical kind of setting, so it doesn't have this sort of direct audience from all that's the fire department, but it's more like groups of people touching each other, reaching out to one another under, difficult situations. And it also created for really great compositions and settings and so on and so forth. So there's a large group of drawings, and then I sort of started to transpose some of these themes into these large paintings, of which this is an example. First I had these people look at each other, and that really didn't work at all. So it was hard to look even at the painting for what's this painting, but by turning the face of the woman to the viewer, actually to you, makes the viewer, in a sense, part of the painting. There's kind of a visual interaction between the painting sort of reaching out into the space and the viewer, and sort of implicates the viewer into the story and the narrative of the painting. The painting on the wall here is a deer crossing the river, is part of the extensive series of works I've done, mainly as a response to my journeys. I have a trailer, and I put like watercolor in my van, and I travel around, oftentimes in Oregon, in southern Oregon, in these deserts, and make watercolors in the American landscape, very much like I did there on the ship. And then sometimes there's these watercolors which sort of say, this would make really a very interesting painting, and sort of take these kind of landscapes and scale them up, and then sort of, change it. So I make the watercolor, and then I transpose the watercolor into a drawing where it becomes a little looser, a little freer, detached from the actual descriptive reality of the moment. And then I have this sort of view of like there's this incredible, pristine, gorgeous landscapes out here, but we don't live anymore in these landscapes. There is no more Arcadia. There's, you know, even the most remote landscapes in the world are irradiated with, you know, radiation, with pollution, with jet airplanes flying over. There is just nowhere in the world anymore where the world is just pure, empty. You know, there's like the effect of everything. Our climate is changing all over, and we have to reconcile ourselves, not like pretend it's not happening. That is the case. Last fall, for instance, I was painting all in these bird areas around French Glen, in this bird landscape, and I was making this big watercolor, and it was so quiet that I could just hear the blood in my ears. It was just deadly silent, and I just totally concentrated on this big watercolor. They're not easy to do, so to really pay attention. It was right behind French Glen, this huge sort of massive mountain, and all of a sudden, like out of nothing, there was this extremely loud screaming noise of this F-16 fighter that flew like straight over my head. And it was so loud that I thought it was going to hit. And it startled me, and I actually went like and it was just shocking. And while I was somewhat recuperating, there was another one. And so there were just two planes just sort of ripping straight through the silence. And that notion, that whole idea of wilderness is just not there. It's an illusion. That is sort of in that painting. In the distance in that painting, there's this plane. You know, so it's all silent and it's all like beautiful and deer crossing and all that, and beautiful light and all that. But in a fraction of a second, there's been this huge explosion. So there's this moment of silence where, in time, in a really short time, things will be just. That intensity really gives a kind of heightened kind of, it takes away the kind of romanticness and gives a kind of suspense to what we in the past thought was sort of like Arcadia. So those are some of the themes in his work. It's, you know, we're only doing these kind of paintings. Anyway, does anybody have a question? Yeah.
Hank, how long did you spend on that painting?
Usually I work on, most of these paintings are part of pairs. So usually when you work on one painting, I always also work on another one. So when it is dry, I can look at it and stuff, because it went through a number of iterations, you know, like I had there's 4 preliminary pen and ink drawings, big pen and ink drawings I did of various compositions, various you know, directions of this telescope. Some of them had figures in them, some of them had still lifes in them, some of them had like the watercolor of a night sky, the concrete dome. There's one of them with a huge moon in it. There's some of them where figures sort of like reaching, like it's the last thing they can ever look at. You know, oh my God, everything is gone. Let's look at the telescope. Maybe there's something out there. There's a whole bunch of work. So there's at least 5 pieces ahead of this watercolor until I decided to just take out all the you know, the narrative, take out the figures, take out the still lifes which drew too much attention, and just have just the telescope with this fixed sort of holding this thing up. It's got a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of glazing to it. The whole sky is like, you know, probably about 6-7 layers of paint, all this sort of slightly adjusted and stuff. So there was, you know, from the start to finish this painting was probably about 4 months or so. Same year, it's just an enormous amount of work.
Hank, was this, it looks like the interior of a ship, maybe kind of tie into the
Actually, it's sort of loosely based on the, you know, Laura Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. It has a big telescope there, and it has a wooden dome. It was built by carpenters there. The thing is over 100 years old, and it looks like an old barn. And a friend of mine who was an astronomer was there while I was working on the painting, and he emailed me a picture from a cell phone on the computer of the interior of this wooden dome, and I thought that would just be so cool. Wooden barn-like thing against this high-tech sort of telescope tubes. So I ended up using that. That was really fun to do.
Once you told the story of that,
and all that.
once you told the story of the book, that I tied it in with the,
Yeah, they echo each other in
Yeah.
that sense.
You know what that also looks like? It's the Air Museum.
Pardon?
That also looks like the interior of the Air Museum out on the coast.
Yeah,
Right
I
inside the
never,
museum.
yeah, right, that's huge, yeah.
Yeah, where they make the blimps.
Yeah, I've been there.
That's exactly what I thought it was.
What was the name of that ship again that the painting's based on?
Prince Willem,
V.I.
P-R-I-N-S, Willem, W-I-L-L-E-M.
Just curious, thanks.
Prince Willem. Yeah.
I really loved your stories and your connections to history.
Pardon?
I really loved hearing the stories and the connection to history and environment and everything. Do you keep this written also? Do you have a book where you write all the stories? Or is it only your art speaking to us?
Well, I'm sort of when I'm on the road, I write journals. So there's a fair amount of, journals or sort of descriptions of, adventures, like when I was with the fire department, I was here in the fire bureau. That we just sitting waiting all day for the alarms are ringing, so let's go and go to some emergency, and then you sit and wait for hours, and then there's another one. Usually these actual events, they are so professional, they take about 20 minutes to grab some, injured person on the road and get them all stabilized and get them on the board and get them off. That is somewhere that's sort of compact some time, and then go back to the firehouse and make dinner or hang out and watch TV or whatever they do. Let's go. So that period of time allowed me to write down precisely what happened in that incident, the interiors, the houses I went to, the strokes I witnessed, the car accidents, whatever. So I have all this sort of stories about the narrative, the conversations and stuff. So I follow that. Or in the desert, I described, what I do all day and stuff. So there's a fair amount of sort of narrative like that. But I don't really find myself writing a lot about, ideas and all that. So I don't have anything.
In probably 1984, 85, you had an exhibit at the Leach Gallery, and as I recall, the canvas is where a royal or religious thing. And there were like bird skulls often on top of
Pardon?
dressed in bird skulls on top of people dressed in robes and things.
Well, yeah, I remember that show. I had a lot of sort of war memory paintings in it, I remember. So one just still lives. There was I've been through a period of time where I painted a lot of large-scale portraits, and they're not dissimilar from these where I take like friends or people I knew and dress them in some sort of costume so that it's take on this real powerful theatricality and actually sort of heightened presence. And also at the time I had a couple of women who used to pose me nude for me in the studio. And so I did this big double portraits, and I had also actually from the opera there was some sailors of like props, and I had bought some bird mask, and I had Zoom just wear this big bird mask. I still have the painting actually, it's a cool painting. It was taken to a Chicago art fair, and all the Americans were really shocked about it, and all the Europeans laughed at the Americans.
How about one more question?
This gentleman.
Looking at that painting and that painting, I'm just guessing that you made this one first and that one second, but I'm noticing compositionally how you use the yellow pole and the object of the separation, the plane, but how you separate two parts. And then I'm looking over here, looking at the deer crossing the stream, and the plane being kind of a wedge, and it points to the opening of the separation between. The notion of that kind of movement and tragedy, potential separation, water and stone, and water and stone. I just wondered what you felt about the relation.
If you look at my paintings, you may see that oftentimes I use, although it's not really that evident in this particular show, that I use actually a lot of mirrors in painting. So yeah, reflecting things from outside the painting into the painting, or double paintings, double imagery, like flipping it over, using mirrors, using angled mirrors, which like reflects things outside of the view into it, and then looking around it, and then having a mirror where things double downward. I do that actually quite a lot in paintings, studio paintings. This landscape is actually based on an actual place. This is like the Dollar and Blitzen River in southern Oregon, in the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. The plane was first larger, drew too much attention to itself, so I just actually reduced it down and stuff. And it's really very much in the focus of the painting, so it's like, things sort of converge right into it. So it has a sort of a small detail, but placing it like that, it gives a great deal of suspense. This also has aerospace referenced by doing that aircraft engine, which is an engine out of the Second World War. Actually, it's an older representation. Here, the landscape is completely imagined. There is no such place. This is like totally, I made this landscape. It came out of a drawing, came out of my imagination. So there's a different kind of connection to the landscape in painting. That one came out of the direct experience, and this came sort of the memory of the painting experience and stuff. So there's that kind of disconnect between the landscape, but because I've painted so many of them, and there's this sort of repeated kind of theme throughout these things, there's also this relationship to these two pieces.
Did that one come before this one?
They came all pretty much, that one came maybe a little bit before, but there's another painting which came simultaneously. They're all sort of, they all done, all these paintings are all kind of overlapped in a sense. There's a pair in it as well, there's another painting. Like which also looks a little different, but also based on watercolor, I think, in Tijds.
Thank you very much, Hank. I think some people have